Now, this particular episode came from a question that I put out on Instagram, and it was about the dumbbell chest fly. So outstretched arms coming over your head, that type of thing, or over your chest, let's say. Now, the question is what part of the movement does that particular exercise load the most? So you've got the lengthened position where the arm is completely outstretched and that's kind of reaching behind you. Then you've got the mid-range as you go through the movement, and you've got the shortened range as it basically your arm comes across your chest. Now, I asked the question as to what part of that movement does that dumbbell chest fly load the most? The answer is the lengthened position, but it led on to a specific question as to maybe why would you want to ditch that exercise from your workout completely if your goal is to build bigger chesticles, that bigger boobage, that bigger breasticles? Because in my opinion, for a lot of people, I won't say all, it's probably not the best exercise if that's the goal. If the goal is to build a bigger chest, maybe it's not one of your first go-to exercises. That's not to say it's a completely bad exercise and you should never do it and it hasn't got any benefit, but maybe it shouldn't be everybody's go-to exercise where building chest is the primary goal. Now, exercise selection is important if you want to build the most amount of muscle possible in the shortest possible time frame. That's everyone's freaking nirvana goal, surely. No one says, I wish I could build some muscle, but I wish it would take 30 years. No one says that. So you haven't got an infinite amount of time. You've probably got a job, you've probably got a fucking life, and you've probably, not like me, just sit around making podcasts all fucking day long. You've got shit to do. And you don't want to spend all of your precious time sat in the gym doing a billion freaking exercises that actually, when you think back and you look back on what it is you're doing, they weren't optimal. I could have got better results with less. You don't want to think that, right? So that's why we're going to be delving into this particular exercise and why it might not be the first one on the top of your workout sheet. Now, when it comes to building chest, if you look back through the annals of bodybuilding time, you will see that the chest fly appears quite a fucking lot. You will see it kind of like most bodybuilding programs from when I was a kid were pretty much you did a form of bench press, a form of an incline press, and you did a dumbbell fly, and maybe some shitty chest pullover or something like that. That was kind of it. That was bodybuilding 101 for chest back in the, what shall I say, mid-90s? Mid-90s? Was that when I was a fucking kid? Jesus Christ, I'm old. But the chest fly, that dumbbell chest fly, might not be the best way for you to go. Now, to explain this, I'm going to explain two different concepts to you. Now, the first is something called the resistance profile. Now, every exercise has what we call a resistance profile. And this is, I'm going to make this kind of layman's terms for you. This basically means that there is a point during that movement where the exercise feels hardest and where it feels easiest. And that is one of the basic principles, how we break down whether an exercise is quote unquote good or bad. Now we'll come on to some examples in a second. So you've got this concept where an exercise is at one point in the movement quite challenging and at one point in the movement quite easy. Now we have to layer on top of that something called the strength profile, or you also hear it called the strength curve. Now this refers not to the exercise, but to the muscle or muscles that are actually performing that exercise. So this is where the muscle is at its strongest position and also at its weakest position. So within a given movement, a muscle will be weak and it will be strong. And understanding the strength profile will help you understand exercise and movement better, because what you want really is for the two things to match. For example, where an exercise is hardest, you want your muscles to be in its most advantageous position, its strongest position. When the exercise gets easier, you want your muscle to be at that weaker point. So as it's weak, the exercise is easy. So you're trying to match this resistance profile with the strength profile as much as possible. Now you don't have to do it perfectly every time for every exercise. That's where exercise selection, pairing exercises together, that comes in. Now, you've also want to work your muscles through a full range of motion. So you want to work through what we call lengthened position, mid-range position, and the shortened position. And then for the chest, imagine, like I said before, you've got the lengthened position where your arms kind of really outstretched. You've got the mid-range position as you bring it across your body, kind of in that middle point. And then as you bring your bicep as far as you can across your chest, that's getting that pec into its most shortened position. So you want to work through that complete range of motion. Now, ideally, you might want to do that with one exercise. You might want to do it with two. You might have to do it with three. Depends on what particular exercises that you're doing and what muscles you're trying to work. But essentially, you're trying to do those two things. So you've got this concept where you're trying to get strength profiles and resistance profiles to potentially match, doesn't have to. And then you're also trying to work a muscle through its full range of motion. So that's where you're going to be starting to pick through exercise selection, so you start to marry the two things together. Now, when we talk about the strength profile, again, this is about muscles as well, there's a slight variation when it comes to different movements as well, because there is a different strength profile for a multi-joint movement, and there's a different strength profile for an isolation movement. So for example, a squat goes from you're in a strong position when you're stood upright to a weak position when you're down in the bottom of that squat, and you go back to strong. So you go from that strong point to that weak point. That's what happens in a multi-joint movement. Now, in an isolation movement, you go from weak to strong, back to weak. And an example of that would be a bicep curl. So with your arm outstretched in complete and utter extension, that's slightly weak at that point. You start to then curl the dumbbell and you're in this more advantageous position where your muscle is getting progressively stronger. Then you get to full contraction and you actually get a little bit weaker again. So you go from weak to strong to weak. And understanding those concepts really helps you then start to build a training program that works, because you're going to select better exercises for you and for your goal. And you're also going to be learning how to work the muscle through its full range of motion properly. They're the key sorts of things that you need to think about when it comes to those various different things. So now let's look at the dumbbell fly now that we understand those basic concepts. Now, when you look at that dumbbell chest fly, the exercise profile, so where the exercise is hardest and it's most easiest, is like this. Basically, when your arm is outstretched to the side, that's when the exercise is at its most challenging. As you bring the dumbbell up, so it's kind of above your chest, if you're lying on your back on a bench, it's at the easiest points when it's directly above you. Now, at that point, there is no challenge on the pec. There is nothing really happening on the pec at that point. Now, when you have look at the strength profile of that particular exercise, when your arm is outstretched in that difficult position, the exercise is its hardest, you're actually at your weakest point. Then when you bring the dumbbell up, you're at your stronger point at that point there. Now, that means that there is a mismatch between those two profiles. Ideally, it's not the best exercise for making sure you're getting a complete challenge throughout that movement. Also, because when you get past that sort of mid-range, because gravity and where your shoulder joint is, you basically lost the challenge on the pec. You've lost tension. It becomes a pointless movement if your goal is to build bigger breasticles at that point. So it's not a full range challenge. So let's go back to the old school bodybuilding way of developing a training program for chest, and you've got a pressing movement which doesn't necessarily challenge the short range particularly well. You've then got a dumbbell fly, which is a mismatched profile, as well as the bench press, but that's for another day. And then you've got not really challenging that short range position either. So in that particular workout, you've not really challenged that pec muscle through a full range of motion. Therefore, I would look at either replacing that dumbbell fly, maybe with a cable, because a cable, even though it's the same position, the same process, is that you are getting that complete challenge throughout that movement. And depending on how you set up that exercise, you can actually match those strength and resistance profiles better. Potentially, therefore, making this a better exercise, more of a challenge, working the pec through a complete full range of motion once you pair it through various different exercises as well. So that's really why I think that a dumbbell chest fly is probably not the best option for you to go for if you want to build bigger chest muscles. Like I said, you don't have to eliminate it completely. You might want to pair it with a few different exercises. So you might want to pair a dumbbell chest fly with a pressing movement and with something else that challenges it in that shortened position. So really the thing is looking at exercise selection. It's not really just picking on the dumbbell chest fly. It's looking at exercise selection for all of the different muscle groups that you're trying to work, and especially the ones you're trying to prioritize. Are you working them through their full range of motion? Are you working ideally with matched resistance and strength profiles? Or at least are you pairing exercise so you can get those full range challenges on the muscles that you're trying to work?